Hello, good evening, and welcome back. So you might have heard that with Twitter censoring dissidents, Angela Merkel from Germany was a little bit peeved that Twitter was taking such action, even when it affected global interests, including those in Germany. And you'd be forgiven for thinking that this was because Angela Merkel decided that she wished to stand up for Enlightenment values, but no, instead it was because she wished to have the responsibility and the decision making in who got banned and censored and shouldn't be listened to. As within Germany, she is upping the surveillance on her political enemies, namely the AFD, as we read the report here. Germany, which is Angela Merkel, to put right-wing opposition party AFD under surveillance amid reports politicians have denigrated Muslim migrants and trivialized country's Nazi past. And of course, if you wish to enact Godwin's law and enact similarities between the National Socialist Workers' Party and what is happening today, that if you're talking about removing people's rights to defend themselves, if you're talking about an increased social state, and if you're talking about removing dissidents and keeping them in camps until they get better, whether that be because of an illness or otherwise, then you can see where it is quite easy to point the Nazi finger. But I think too often it is too easy of a cop-out to just say, well, hey, we all agree the Nazis were bad, therefore, there's something similar to what they did, therefore they're a Nazi and are de facto evil. Instead of being tribal, even though I'm sure we can agree that the Nazis did do terrible things, that it's often more helpful to pinpoint particular policies, and by all means use them as a case study, but not just to say, oh, these two policies have some overlap, therefore the person with the overlapping policy is evil. No, instead, pinpoint the particular positions and go after them. Good. So the party has been under investigation over fears it has become more radical. That is to say that the Overton window is trying to be shifted further left towards National Socialists. Would you believe it? And therefore, if somebody is Eurosceptic and against mass immigration, particularly in Germany, then there seems to be even more of a radical, even though their position may not have changed. The move would see several dozen lawmakers in Parliament monitored by the state, so don't be thinking that this is just some radical fringe that nobody really cares about and like plotting terrorist acts, because that is not the case at all. No, instead, it is for democratically elected lawmakers are then being so-called monitored, and of course we all know where that leads, the whole, trust and safety commissions and all that bad stuff. That this is from people who have unarguable support and are wanted to be there as at least a pressure valve or outlet for a plurality of the population in order to feel as if they could actually have a legal voice in trying to represent themselves. Otherwise, of course, you risk sending them underground, and we all know where that happens if they fester without sunlight. So, again, definitely a bad move. And it can certainly be seen as simply going after political enemies, because the defense of saying, oh, they're radical is a bit too flimsy, given that there is clearly public support behind it. That what you would wish to say is, maybe we should try and expose them and show people what they're all about, if they're that bad. And if you can't do that and instead wish to silence them, then you're doing a terrible thing. A regional branch of the AFD was placed under surveillance last summer. So it is essentially saying, well, that kind of pilot scheme went okay, in which case we're going to spread this out even more to affect more people. And why is this happening? Well, as I said at the start, it is because they're against Islam, which is definitely understandable. Islam is the fastest growing religion for official figures. However, that is largely put down to the larger repopulation rate than other religions, or even atheism, simply because the Muslims have far more children. However, it must also be seen that, of course, by going through the Quran and by taking into account abrogation, whereby the newer verses discount the older verses, that going through the life of Muhammad, you will see in his earlier life, he was persecuted, in which case he was saying, be peaceful and we want to be peaceful, so don't attack us because we mean you no harm, until later on, and later of life, in the latter part of the Quran, he then found himself in power and would then just obliterate his enemies as best that he could and wage war and a caravan robber and that sort of thing. And because of abrogation, that takes precedence, and hence radical Muslims are more violent, simply because they're following the Quran as it's written. That isn't against an individual, that is against an ideology, which is read as it should be read as written, if you will. So it's understandable that a country does not wish to have a warring ideology within its own country. And for those that haven't listened to much of Enoch Powell, I do strongly recommend that you take the opportunity in order to check out interviews, whether that be from the Hoover Institution or the Dick Cavett Show even, then most certainly do, because he had a knack to not only articulate things very eloquently, but also to predict things with uncanny accuracy. And it will definitely help to establish the situation of which we find ourselves in contemporarily. So the Federal Office of the Prosecution for the Constitution, a body inspired by Allied forces who helped write a new German constitution after the Second World War, has identified cases of party politicians denigrating Muslim migrants to the country and trivializing its Nazi past, NPR reports. The point being to say, well, sure, the Nazis were bad, however, as I say, it was a speck of bird shit in more than 1,000 years of successful German history. And naturally, us Britons have something to say to that. It's just how successful it was. But nonetheless, surely it's understandable then if it was, 20 years compared to 1,000 years. They are acknowledging that bad things happened. As far as I can tell, they're not trivializing that, unless you were to say that then a speck of bird shit is trivializing it, in which case, fair enough. But in the grand scheme of saying 20 years out of 1,000, is it really? I mean, of course, drawing out 1,000 years, so you could argue that that's accurate, but of course, given the magnitude, not just because of its recency, but also because of technological innovations, it has far-reaching consequences. I could say that, yeah, that is downplaying it at least a little bit. So, I do understand the idea of patriotism. I do understand the idea of nationalism. I do understand the idea that you wish to be proud of the country that you've been born into and be proud of your ancestors that brought you to the place where you are now. Most certainly. And it is not healthy to try and have some original sin based on your nationality or ethnicity or sex or gender or whatever it may be. Something that you cannot undo. It is vital that everybody has opportunities and hope in order to better themselves, and they do not have to be typecast into being a particular person because of things that are out of their control. So, most certainly, I do support that. And if that's the point, and going by a larger context of what I've read about them, that they are trying to push, then fair enough. Quite honestly, fair enough. It's like you do not wish to downplay it, but you do wish to add more context. And you do wish to also say, we're better than this. Like, we've done well before, we've done well since. This was a stain in our history. We do not wish to repeat this, but we are better than this. We can be better than this. And we deserve it to do better than this for not only ourselves who have had nothing to do with the National Socialist Workers' Party, but also our children that will be coming after us. In which case, you can't really argue with that. So why has it come about? Well, some figures have slammed it as a political move, as the agency has gone by Chancellor Angela Merkel's government Yes, the Chancellor, with members of our own Christian Democratic Union Party on the payroll. Party politicians claim the CDU is concerned by the rise of the AFD, with it now having 88 of the Bundestag's 709 members, a representation of more than 12%. A voice for the voiceless, if you will. It comes after the same agency placed a regional branch of the AFD under surveillance last summer, denting the Nationalist Party's efforts to establish itself as a credible opposition force. And that seems to be the point. It's just underhanded tactics. It is not, oh, well, let's have the marketplace of free ideas. Let us debate things out in the open and let people decide for themselves. No, instead, it is, well, oh, you seem to be trying to put an end to our monopoly on power, our cartel. So let's just change the laws and bring the ladder up behind us so that you cannot compete. And we will not allow people to hear your ideas, as they will probably support them and go against us. So Germany's done it before, and I'm sure they'll do it again. So let's be nice then that AFD, at least there, were not suggesting that Angela Merkel was enacting such socialist policies. Not this time, anyway. And naturally, they're railing against the coronavirus lockdowns because they're wishing for freedom, for the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, to reference the US. And you can't do that if you've got mass immigration. You can't do that if you've got a centralised European authority telling you what to do. And you can't do that if your own government is telling you that you can't do anything because of an invisible enemy. So no wonder they're railing against COVID lockdowns as well, and gaining hefty support, a definite plurality, because of it. So we'll see where this goes, and if the surveillance will actually come of any use, and hopefully it won't be as impactful as it had been before. But bear in mind, you do not wish to paint somebody as a victim, because if you do, then they can still spend their time away as a martyr for the cause, if you will, and come back bigger and better than before, and come back on the scene more explosive than when they had gone away in the first place. And who knows, if you send them to jail, they might even write a book that will revolutionise the whole country and affect the entire world. But perhaps that's just one person's struggle. But that's it for me. So as always, let me know what you guys think down below of, is this just what we're going to see repeated around the world, and people will be sent underground, and therefore different social media applications in order for people to communicate with each other will be used, and we will not be silenced? Or if you think, hang on a minute, no, these guys are a bit too far gone, and they do actually need surveillance because we don't know what they're doing, and we should know what they're doing. In fact, why isn't the entire German government under surveillance? We need to know what they're doing as well. Either way, let me know down below. Always intrigued to hear what you guys have to say. And as always, until next time, have a good one.